we are going to jump right in to our next panel. And just to remind everyone that we have an amazing networking session later this evening, and we will be joined by Dr. Reynolds after this energy session. So it is no question that in each of our industries, it is impossible to not be speaking very strategically about energy right now. It is easily the most globally topical conversation in several spheres and industries. So I have no doubt that our next panel will bring tremendous value and insight. So let's jump right in. So allow me to introduce our moderator for that panel, Dr. Dax Driver. He's the president and CEO of the Energy Chamber of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Driver has overseen the complete transformation.
I'm sorry.
Hello?
I was an open mic. Apologies. Go ahead.
Okay. So I thought I was doing something wrong. Dr. Driver has overseen the complete transformation of this organization into an extremely well-respected, recognized chamber. He has reached, along with this organization, across the Caribbean region, talked before about partnership, and has extensive knowledge in the energy industry and policy issues impacting the sector. Most importantly, in the small island and middle income economies. Allow me, and please join in the chat to welcome Dr. Dax Driver in our presence, who will take us through this next panel. Dax, you are on.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Thanks a lot for the introduction. It's fantastic to be joining everybody here. I'm joining from Point Lisas in Trinidad and Tobago. So in the middle of a huge, big, world-class petrochemical complex, which we have here. So people might be wondering, what are you doing talking about renewable energy coming from the petrochemical sector, and a lot of natural gas flowing through pipelines all around me here in Point Lisas. But I hope that'll become clear of why we're doing that. I'm joined by two fantastic people, a great panel. Very excited about the panel we have this afternoon. We have, I'm seeing there on the screen, Stephen Wedderburn, who is with business development for Total Energies, or Total, as it used to be known.
Right.
So Total is it's an interesting one. Because this is one of the oil majors, one of the seven sisters, one of the big global oil companies, but has really transformed itself in the last few years into an integrated energy company. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So you're bringing a lot of renewables in. And Dionne Nugent, who I'm not seeing your face there, Dionne. I'm seeing your screen. I hope you're there with us, who is with Jamaica Public Service Limited. For the non-Jamaicans in the meeting, or people who don't know Jamaica well, Jamaica Public Service Limited, or JPS, is the electricity utility. It's not the public service. That confused me sort of when I first began dealing with Jamaica. But it's the electricity utility. Dionne, are you there with us? I'm not seeing you, but I'm seeing you on the screen. Okay, seem to have left the stage. Perhaps we'll get her back just now. But Stephen, we have you here. So in the panel today, I think what we had wanted to talk about, I mean, Francis had given us this sort of very sort of provocative title about developing cost-effective renewable strategies powered by pandemic-era insights. I'm not sure exactly what insights we have from the pandemic. I think we'll have different experiences through it, but I think there are a lot of things we learned. But I think that there was also there's sort of some general energy sector stuff I think we need to talk about to start with. So what we'd sort of think we were going to address this was talk generally about sort of what's going on with the energy transition globally, and then going to the strategy heading. What does that mean in terms of sort of strategy making in companies, and how does that actually show up? Then we'll talk a little bit about what we learned through the pandemic, and then we'll sort of bring it down to talking about the Caribbean setting. So that was sort of the four things that we had thought about. And we'll take questions as they come up from the Q&A function. Ask people to please use that Q&A button rather than the chat. Makes it a bit easier for us to keep an eye on things. So Stephen, while we're waiting for Dionne to come back, I wonder if she might be having some camera issues, I guess. But so while we're waiting for that, perhaps you and I can just start to sort of chat about the global energy transition. So, I mean, I think that we all know, everybody I hope knows the direction we're traveling in, which is towards net zero, and clearly climate change is what's driving a lot of the decision making within at the sort of the big picture within the industry, driving in that direction. But I think what we're seeing is it's a road we're on, but there's a lot of bumps on that road. There's a lot of strange turns and things where we're in different directions we're having to take and to navigate. Unexpected things like COVID happen, and then the supply chain disruptions coming out of that, and then the geopolitics, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. These things all sort of are unexpected events, complex things to deal with. But in the context where we know the direction which we're heading in, is that sort of how you see things, Stephen, as well? And perhaps you can just comment on from a big company point of view, a Total point of view, where do you guys see things moving?
Right. Okay. And Dax, perhaps I'll start, because we have to remember that we have non-energy audiences.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Please.
I just assume, because I know though most people I think will have heard the term net zero. There may be members of the audience who don't really know what it is, and essentially, as we seek a sustainable future, net zero is a point at which we are extracting the same amount of carbon that we are putting into the atmosphere, so that at a point we become balanced and essentially in equilibrium. A lot of our environmental problems are caused by the fact that we put far more carbon dioxide in the air than we take out. And then the other term I just want to touch on is the energy transition, because again, in the energy industry, we talk about energy transition all the time, and forgetting that some people may not appreciate it. And so energy transition is really, in a broad scope, the move away from an energy supply based primarily on fossil fuels to a more sustainable energy future in which renewables will play a major role. But again, so net zero and energy transition are basically hand in hand, because in order to get to net zero, we have to have what is called the energy transition, where we move away from energy technologies that put a lot of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. All right, so with that in mind, though, I will just say that...
Stephen, just one thing I think is important that picking up from that is that, so when we're saying net zero, and I think your point about it's net zero, so there might still be fossil fuels within a net zero scenario, but you're also taking carbon out as well.
Right. Yes, that's it. So yeah, it does not mean that we are not putting carbon, and unfortunately, we will still be putting a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, but at least at that point, we would be taking, as much as we put in out and not increasing the load. And most companies, well, I'd not say most, a lot of organizations around the world have adopted net zero targets for 2050. So we're basically talking just a little bit under 30 years, where most of the world is saying we want to get to this point of net zero, which means that we really have to be making the decisions now, because as we'll talk about later, energy is a long-term, the strategic business. The investments you make in energy take long to build, long to construct in energy installation, and they are expected to operate for a very long time. So in terms of strategy, if you are aiming for 2050, many people would say we are already late in a lot of what we have to do.
Sure.
And some of us have, and there are a lot of targets before 2050. There are a significant amount of targets for 2030. So many CARICOM countries, for instance, have renewable targets, of 100% renewable, 50% renewable by 2030. So which again, based on what I've just said about the long-term nature of energy projects, really should be tying down exactly what we will be pursuing in order to meet those short-term 2030 targets. You know, I know Jamaica has, I think we have a 2030 target, which I think is to be about 30% renewables by 2030 and 50% renewables by 2035 in our electricity.
Yeah, Trinidad's also 20, 30, 30%. We have that's same target. You guys are a long way ahead of us, but we have one project coming up now which should help push us closer to that.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So I just want to get the story. You know, one of my points which I really want to drive home in this session is that we need to make decisions, and we need to make those decisions fairly quickly in terms of ensuring that the strategies that we talk about implementing are actually implementable. You know, because I think what has happened, we have no problem setting targets and objectives, but a lot of time the implementation strategy is very weak, and we are not achieving the targets that we have, we set out. But it is very important, you know. The story about energy has, although there have been lots of bumps along the way, worldwide recessions, COVID, wars and stuff that have caused the energy sector and the oil industry. Well, and I talk about oil because in the Caribbean, we have to realize that the majority of our countries are dependent, around 90% dependent on oil. You know, many of Caribbean countries are actually 100% or 95, 96% dependent on oil. So what happens in the oil industry is very important for us. But there are certain themes if you think about it. You know, when I started in the energy industry a little bit over 30 years ago, I'm feeling rather old now, but at that time, the big theme was energy security, and that has continued to be a theme. So regardless of all the disruptions that we have gone through, you always hear people talking about energy security. And a big part of what we mean by energy security is reducing our reliance on imported oil so that, we have more indigenous sources of energy and are not subject to the vagaries of the international oil markets and the swings and so on. So that, so I said there's been lots of bumps along the road, but there's been a very consistent theme of energy security. I mean, I think perhaps Trinidad, where you are from, Dax, it has not been as strong a theme because you have the resource yourself. But I think in virtually every other Caribbean country, that has been a big theme. And although the biases have changed, it was energy security. We now have, the net zero, the climate change targets. They are all actually pushing us in the same direction, which is to move to diversify our energy base and where possible to have indigenous, to utilize indigenous sources of energy. So despite, as I say, all the turbulence of COVID and, all of what else is happening in the world, I think the long-term strategy has been clear for a long time, which is, we need energy diversification and we need to be maximizing our use of indigenous sources. So having said all of that, I guess the issue is, are we making progress and are we going to get there or what needs to be done to speed up? But the other point I'd like to, as we are waiting Dionne to come back, I just make one more point in that I think from a strategy perspective, and I especially wanted to mention this at a strategy conference, that our energy companies in the Caribbean have actually been very good in terms of ensuring that we have consistent and reliable supply of energy. I know consumers all over the Caribbean, we will cuss the utility companies that, the prices are too high and the same thing for the petroleum retailers. But if you think about it, our companies have been delivering extremely high levels of service and, across the Caribbean, and which means that these companies themselves must be doing something right, putting strategies in place to supply and do the business that they are currently doing. I remember, in my early career, I used to visit an OPEC country. So there's a OPEC country, big oil supplier, where there was no reliable electricity service. The blackouts every day. Everybody had to have their own generator. But even having your own generator in an oil-producing country, there were shortages of petroleum products. You could not get diesel and gasoline readily. So I think many Caribbean people, because we have had good service, don't realize that things like that happen around the world. That you can be in an oil-producing country and you have to buy diesel on the black market. It's sort of So kudos to our energy companies, and but the point I'm making though is because they have been good at doing these the traditional services, maybe that is part of the problem why the pressure of changing and diversifying has not been greater. Because despite all the disruptions, despite all the hurdles along the way, by and large, we have had consistent energy supply in the Caribbean.
I can see that point very much here in Trinidad on our electricity sector, where we've had the Electricity Commission, who is a well-run organization. They consistently deliver electricity to also a big industrial base as well as domestic consumers. And they took some innovative ideas back really 1950s, and they began using that natural gas. But it's been very sort of stable since then. It's sort of a very stable model. There were some changes in the structure of the power producers about 30 years ago. But other than that, a very sort of model. And it's sometimes you feel a little bit like Electricity Commission is sort of like, well, we do a good job of this, and sort of let's leave us to do this because we sort of know what we're doing.
Right.
Is that something you think you're seeing a similar pattern in the rest of the region?
Yes, and I think generally, so which is why I say, kudos to the energy sector in the Caribbean. Our companies are generally pretty well run, and so that's one thing we must give ourselves a pat on the back for.
So I mean, I think there's a whole affordability question, and I wish we had Dionne who faces that issue. I think constantly, and I think we can talk a little bit more about sort of perhaps diversity in supply. As we sort of go along, and so I think there's some really interesting things happened in Jamaica, over the last decade or so, and some really quite fundamental changes, which perhaps we can talk about a bit later on. But perhaps we could also have just a chat. I wonder, Francis, if we could get an indication if Dionne's going to be joining us back again. Perhaps if you just drop something on the chat, so I sort of have a sense of what's happening there. But Stephen, one of the things I wanted to talk with you about is the okay. So see, she's rebooting. Okay, good. So hopefully we'll have her back in a little bit. One of the things we had sort of when we met earlier this week and had a little bit of a chat around is this issue, this sort of challenge which I think a lot of energy companies face around timescales, because you have these really long planning horizons because you're planning projects which the payback is over decades, and you've got these sort of long time horizons. So sort of a lot of long-term thinking in how you're having to approach strategy. But then this is a sector which also moves incredibly quickly. We particularly on pricing. I mean, just over 2 years ago, we were on negative oil prices. I mean, unprecedented. Theoretically, people were having to pay to give away oil. I mean, that's not quite how it works because for the trading. But I mean, that was negative oil prices, and now we've got these incredibly high oil prices at historic highs, and I mean natural gas prices in Europe and they've been up there for months now. Fertilizer prices, I think people perhaps don't always see all these things very, very much interlinked, but fertilizer, which we produce a lot of from here in Trinidad, one of the world's major ammonia producers, comes from natural gas. And that's why those fertilizer prices are driving up so high. So we've had this sort of huge, very short, very quick, in 2 years, complete turnaround. But yet people are having to make decisions, on the long term, because you're talking major projects, being delivered and with a long payback period, and allocating capital for that with that real sort of long-term vision in mind. How do energy companies deal with that sort of those two sort of different forces which are acting upon them?
Right. Yes. Yeah. And as you mentioned earlier, I am now with Total Energies, which is one of the top oil companies in the world. I think we may be about the number 4 oil company. But essentially, so it's strange, people would assume that we just want to sell as much oil as possible, and keep doing that, which has been our traditional business. But I think, our company has been good at recognizing some of the long-term drivers, and so for over a decade, we have actually been shifting away from oil, and even within oil, we have made a big shift from reliance on, liquid petroleum, oil products, crude oil, and so on, into natural gas, which is a bit more environmentally friendly than oil itself, and also in renewables. We have made our first forays in the renewable world from over a decade ago, and I think we were very quiet about it. So most people still saw us as just another oil and gas company, but last year, we have changed our name from Total to Total Energies, reflecting the fact that we now see ourselves as a multi-energy company, and that important part of our future, in fact, probably the most important part, will be renewables. So it is. We have a 2030 target, as I mentioned. Most companies nowadays talk about 2030 targets, where if you think about it, as an oil and gas company, we are saying that our revenues from liquid petroleum, that is crude oil and gasoline, diesel, will be less than 50%. In fact, I think only about 30% of our overall revenues. We see a big replacement of revenues in terms of natural gas and renewables. But between natural gas and renewables, we'll have more than 50% of revenue expectations. So that's part of the strategy we are taking. We think that energy companies, there will continue to be a demand for petroleum, for the next few decades. It's not going to go away overnight, but we have to be part of the strategy of helping to shift, to make the shift and to accelerate the shift away from petroleum into cleaner forms of energy. And, so that's a strategy we are taking very seriously. And, part of why I'm here with you today is that, as a company, we are saying, we are ready to help, and, we are actually ready to be part of the Caribbean picture in terms of developing renewable assets and renewable resources around the Caribbean. And, as I say, as one of the larger oil and gas companies, we tend to be, well, I think the reality is we are less capital constrained than the typical Caribbean company. So when you have a company like us, and we are not the only ones, there are other multinational companies who are expressing significant interest in Caribbean renewable energy. So I think that is a good sign for the Caribbean, in that, it used to be that we would argue that the capital is not there, the investors are not there, it's very hard to find people. But companies like Total Energies are now saying, all around the Caribbean, we are willing to help you. We are willing to invest in the renewable energy sector in the Caribbean.
Dionne, great to have you back, and sorry we lost you for a little bit there. We talked a little bit about, just to sort of bring you up to speed, on the sort of the global energy transition and what's driving that, and these sort of these forces around energy security, and the drive for net zero. There's another big trend, which is then also the drive for energy for all and affordable energy for all. So that was the one I think I also wanted just to ask you about from your perspective. This is sort of this challenge about so not so much in the Caribbean, where we have pretty good coverage. There are countries in the Caribbean who still have pockets of people who are not connected to the electricity grid and have and obviously we need to get those people connected, but there's also this issue about affordability. How do you see that sort of issue being driven about making sure that everybody has access to this sort of basic service of electricity and is able to afford at least the basics?
Thank you, Dax, and apologies for the technical difficulties. It's great to be here on the panel, and certainly for including all of our customers, vulnerable and not so vulnerable. It has always been a challenge, and renewables has been positioned as an opportunity, certainly, to increase that basket of customers. So let me just give you an example. So in our setting where we do have a lot of remote customers in far-flung areas, hinterlands of the country, we see renewables as a big opportunity also to bring them into service and reliable types of services. And the challenge really is, how do we deploy those kinds of systems in an economical way that they can afford, and certainly that as investors it makes sense for us. And that's a journey that we are currently on, and that journey certainly is one that we have been taking in relation to how we manage, for example, or issue of non-technical losses. So we are looking at renewables as an option, and for those who are not so familiar.
I think you should explain non-technical losses.
Yes. I'm trying to be very careful here how I define it. So what non-technical losses are losses that are due to typically persons illegally extracting power from the grid, and that occurs for various reasons. And certainly one of the main reasons is sometimes affordability. Persons need the service, but they can't afford the service. And that's a significant issue that we have here in Jamaica. And so we are actually looking at how can we use renewable technologies, very small systems that can provide some basic level of service delivery to the customers, that it can prevent them or mitigate the need for them to actually access the network illegally. So we have several use cases that we're looking at, both in the non-technical losses, and I'm trying not to say theft because certainly several things influence that kind of behavior. We see an opportunity there, and that would cover small scale types of deployment of renewables. But as a utility, certainly we are looking at how can we participate in the national program to bring the scale renewables onto the grid in very affordable prices. And so the government has been very strong on that. I mean, we have gone sub 10 cents so far in our last set of additions to the grid, solar PV in particular, because we want to maintain that downward pressure on the price of electricity. Ultimately, that is a key thing for us. If it's not impacting on that price, we are not going to get the real benefit of the renewable program. So we're doing it in a different levels. Scale affecting the price. We're looking at the lower levels in terms of going down in terms of scale. This is how we can bring the service and the product to our customers in a very affordable way. Renewables is definitely an option. We think that is possible, and we are right now working through that to deliver and to demonstrate those use cases.
So can I ask you the same question we were just discussing with Stephen about the sort of how do you make long-term strategic decisions in a situation of where there's a lot of volatility, particularly in price, and prices of inputs, if you're importing natural gas or particularly if you're importing petroleum products, liquid fuels, can really very, very, very quickly it's going from negative to over $100 in 2 years. How do you, as a company, make sure you're focusing on their long-term issues and don't get sort of distracted by the noise of what's going on in the market?
Well, we had a real life experience of that, Dax. I mean, when we went into LNG, when we were diversifying, the market just flipped on us at the time. We had made a commitment to step into, transitioning out of heavy fuel oils into LNG. And the economics of the the price of oil versus LNG was very attractive at the time, and it flipped. It flipped on us a little bit at the time, and as a business, we had to make critical decisions around that. And several things come to mind in terms of what influenced that. Our commitment to that trajectory, which was, we needed to go down the road with a diversification strategy. So your strategic goals are very important, and your level of commitment to them, to delivering on them, for example, as a critical driver to determine whether you're going to ride through those vagaries of the pricing of the various fuels. So at that time, we said we will stay the course. We believed that the diversification goal was very important. And so we made that decision. In today's world, the pressure really is on trying to get that price of electricity down. We have to work very closely with the government and with our regulator in that regard. So what it has done is driven us to really have very close collaborations on those forecasts, because we're all trying to get to the same outcome, just in coming from different directions. And so a lot of comparison of notes in terms of what are we seeing, what are they seeing, so that when we go a particular direction based on a forecast, there's complete alignment and there's a commitment that, okay, if the prices go up or down, in this way, that we would be able to agree that payments will flow and that we can maintain a certain level of return at the end of the day. It has to be collaboration, I'm telling you. In our market's very small, understanding what your ultimate objectives are at a particular time. And the fact is that we just operate in a very dynamic world, and decisions today may not be perfect, but a commitment to ensuring that we want a particular outcome and we stick to it. We have been able to demonstrate that so far.
So, Stephen, on this sort of strategy setting question as well, that from talking from Total as a listed company, what's the drive that comes from the investing community, on all these sort of the fund managers and their demands around ESG and all of that? How important is that in then company decision making to sort of responding to that shareholder demand?
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, okay. I think those drivers are actually very good for the Caribbean. Well, around the world generally, but very good for the Caribbean. There's no question. Shareholders in companies like Total Energies, they do, a lot of the shareholders, they want their profits, but I think it has become very obvious, not just to the shareholders, but to the management of the companies themselves, that, you can't pursue profits without any consideration of sustainability and what's happening to the world. As energy companies and oil and gas companies in particular, we do have a very, very big impact on the environment. And, if we are a business and we see ourselves as important businesses, but we also have to ensure that we are sustainable businesses and that we are making a better future, not just for ourselves, but for, all our stakeholders, which includes all the countries we operate in, and in fact, the whole world. So, so it is an important driver. Now, what that has done, though, is that it has vastly increased the amount of capital. Because I say the very fact that Total Energies has appointed me as a point person to develop renewable energy projects in the Caribbean, and the scale of projects, which, it's not really going to shake the needle on Total's investment capital,
Sure.
Because all our projects, will be small in comparison to what we are doing elsewhere in the world. But, the fact that we are here, it is coming from that pressure where we want to make our presence felt all around the world, and to ensure that all around the world we are doing something good for the various countries. So, and I say that story is replicated, it's not just Total Energies, but it's replicated in several companies, which is why right now there is a massive amount of capital waiting to be invested, available to be invested in renewable energy projects in the Caribbean. And, one of my frustrations is that we are not taking up that investment capital very quickly. But I guess we'll talk about that aspect later.
Yeah, we can get on that into a couple of minutes. I just wanted to remind the audience that they can put some questions into the Q&A function. I'm not seeing anything coming up yet, but if anybody has any things they want to ask this very esteemed two guests who we have here with us, please put the questions in there. So, and we'll take them as they come up. But I wanted just to switch a little bit to talk about the pandemic, because that was sort of part of our title, Pandemic Insights. And so, and what was the experience during the pandemic? And I mean, I could start talking a little bit from a Trinidad point of view. That, I mean, clearly the energy industry as a whole, particularly the electricity sector, part of the energy industry, really was incredibly important to keep all the lights on. People had with lockdowns, people were not moving as much, so transport fuels were not being moved as much. Though still, obviously, people still had to move around and goods had to move around. But that reliably delivering electricity to everybody at their home was obviously incredibly important. And so the energy industry around the world continued to work through. Was, I think, a major theme that we had here in a lot of unknown things and a lot of fear and concern about this pandemic. But you have to keep everyone's lights on. So Dionne, in the Jamaica case,
yes, the Jamaica case, Dax.
Dionne?
Yes, are you hearing me? Are you hearing me? Okay,
I'm hearing.
He's hearing me. I think that Dax may be having a little bandwidth problem. So if the audience is hearing, I'll continue until he gets back in. So in the Jamaican experience, not very different from the Trinidad experience, where for sure you had to keep the lights going. And, I really want to say that in the energy sector, it demanded that, we move very quickly to, ensure the protocols were in place for our team members from remote working to make that happen, because, everybody is at home, and electricity and probably water are the two main things that you need to make sure, apart from Wi-Fi and communication, were the critical things that had to be in place. And so I think that for us, the pandemic really did showcase our ability to shift in a health crisis and to respond and to keep the service going. But I just want to add that, the pandemic did also create some challenges for us, because as we all know, what happened is that the demand on the system really started to take a downward trajectory throughout that period. And for any system that had a significant amount of renewables, they are typically always on. And so what that meant also, how do you manage the grid in a situation where the demand is a little depressed? And that also would certainly influence your projections for adding new renewables to the grid. So, that reduction in system demand was a feature that we had to contend with, and it did give us some insights around managing renewables when there are, a significant portion of the demand. And, it really also drove the need for us to kind of work through how would the post-COVID environment look and how would renewables actually operate in that sort of environment. So I think that whereas operationally we did very well, there are some lessons we did learn, and we recognize also in that situation that, the public was very sensitive to the price of electricity as well. Many things were happening in the various markets, and we know that in those kinds of situations, we have to be able to optimize on our energy mix so that we can get that best pricing solution and service to our customers. So a number of items there. And I just want to add one quick one. I think that small scale renewables also started to take off just a little bit during the period because everybody was very interested in having their own domestic level of energy security, you know, which was quite interesting that we saw during the period of the pandemic as well. So, you know, that was more or less our experience during the pandemic in terms of the energy sector. That's Dax?
Well, not back yet, but well, I'll just make the comment because when you had dropped off earlier, Dionne, I had started some of my early comments just pointing out that over the years, you know, Caribbean energy companies have actually done a very good job, an excellent job in keeping the lights on and for the petroleum ones, keeping the you know, fuel in the tanks. And so, you know, we really have to praise our companies that, you know, they have been very good, you know, and have improved quite a lot in terms of reliability issues. You know, our consumers will always, you know, complain about pricing, and certainly they are complaining about the pricing nowadays. But I think even as we complain, you know, and putting myself as a consumer now, we have to realize that the companies have actually done a very good job in terms of keeping the supply availability. You know, Caribbean countries generally do not know, you know, you don't run out of oil, you know, not they're sitting out for days without being able to purchase oil, or you don't run out of, you know, electricity. You know, we do have the occasional blackout, but it's, you know, I think for the most part, our service is good around the region.
Yeah, I you know, for us now, the big challenge post-COVID and and you know, the Ukraine situation really is the supply chain challenges. That is now starting to bite a lot more, and that's in terms of our normal operations. And I believe that probably could influence a renewable expansion program as well. So, you know, we're keeping a close watch on that, and we have found that you really need to keep a lot closer connection with your suppliers. We're seeing where delivery times, you know, are really out of whack. You know about the, you know, the freight, what's happening, you know, in terms of shipping and the kind of lead times. And so I wanted to just ask you, since Dax, I'll fill in for Dax for 30 seconds, you know, how does that supply chain challenge impact in terms of your view on the renewable sector and its development in the region?
Yeah. Okay. Well, as you have said, I think the big driver is that as we experience supply chain issues all around the world, you know, I see, you know, a question mark around globalization generally. You know, there was a time when people are saying globalization is the way to go. You know, we can get things quickly to you, so you don't have to have the resource right at hand. And for a while, it seems like that story was being held up. But, you know, we have seen in recent times that disruptions can come very, very easily. And so that trend, I think, not just in a lot of industries, is pushing towards having the resource closer to home. And especially in our countries, in the Caribbean countries, we are, apart from Trinidad and, you know, a tiny amount in Barbados, we don't have much oil resources. We have to essentially be focusing on the resources that we do have, which is renewable resources. You know, once you put up a renewable facility, you're obviously not waiting for a ship. You don't have to wait on ships to bring it in and so on, but it is there. And so I think the basic message coming from this is that we need to exploit our indigenous resources as much as we can. You know, it could be geothermal for some countries, it could be wind and solar for others, but we do need to increase energy security and avoid those supply chain issues by going for our own resources.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Stephen, and for Dionne for stepping in for that 30 seconds. We seem to have lost Dax, but he will be back in a second. This reminds me of when we used to have power outages, but now we seem to be having some internet outages. Hopefully one day we're going to get it all together here in the Caribbean. But, you know, Stephen, you mentioned something earlier. You talked about the focusing on balancing profits, environmental impact with consumer demand, and still remaining a sustainable company. You know, we have people from several different industries here. Could you give us maybe some key nuggets from what you have learned with balancing all of that we can use across the industries?
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, I think probably the most important thing, you know, I don't have any, I wouldn't call it my insights very earth-shattering, but I think one of the most important things I can point out is to take the long-term focus, you know, that, you know, in terms of our strategies, don't just focus on the way things are today. You know, yes, you know, we currently have supply disruptions, you know, due to the war in Ukraine and COVID and everything. But, and, you know, you shouldn't rush into decisions really just because you have those problems. You know, I think sometimes we still need to take that long-term focus, that what is the world going to look like in 20 years, 30 years, and where do I need to be? And I think the decisions become much clearer because it's no use. I think if you take that long-term view, you know, running down profits for this year and next year, if it will cost you in the longer term, you see that it's not a wise decision.
Right.
And you know, I think I'd raised a point earlier, but I repeat it again, that despite all the various disruptions we have had over the last few decades, you know, there are some very important themes, you know, that have been consistent. I just spoke about exploiting indigenous sources of energy. So, you know, 30 years ago, it was just oil market price volatility. That would have been a major concern, but we were still talking about doing our indigenous energy. Today, you know, there's a lot of talk about the climate and now also about supply chain issues. But the answer to all of those issues is relatively consistent, you know, that you diversify and use as much indigenous energy sources as possible. So I say, despite all the ups and downs, I think the answers have remained pretty much the same, which points us that there's a clear direction that we need to move in terms of looking to the future.
Thank you for that, Stephen. And Dionne, just a similar type question for you. What do you think is the most important part of creating your strategy? Once again, we're looking for those nuggets that those within the financial services or other industries can move into their industries. What do you think is the most important part of creating this long-term, heavy investment strategy that, you know, is allowing companies to remain sustainable when, as you pointed out, when you had a flip, immediately something came up and you had a flip. What is that important part in your strategy that allows you to carry through?
Well, I want to tell you that in our industry, you know, you plan and you plan and you plan 50 times before you execute. It is absolutely critical. We're doing long-range planning, 20, 30-year horizon investments. And that sort of rigorous testing around all your input variables are absolutely critical. You heard Dax talking about the fuel prices. We're in the middle of making investment decisions right now, Daniel. And I tell you, my colleague was saying he's tired of doing so many scenario testing because, you know, those kinds of decisions demand that in terms of our strategizing, that we really have a very good picture of what these various scenarios may bring, and to ensure that our shareholders have the value. Once a decision is made, and we have been there, once a decision is made, we just have to be very clear as to what the ultimate strategy objective is. I mentioned before that, you know, we were on a diversification program, and even when there was a flip, we recognize that if the strategy is still on target, and the other variables have gone a little awry, let's stick to what your strategy objective is. So, you know, despite the dynamic nature of your industry, if your strategy is clearly taking you to a particular goal and that is still maintained, it's my recommendation that you proceed along that, despite the noise that you may be facing around the decision that you're taking. And so for me, renewables is critical. I think that decision, Stephen has been saying, you know, we have to make that transition into more indigenous sources of energy. And I'm not sure if I missed it earlier, Daniel, but, you know, where I think we're lacking is we have the strategy. I think we have the clarity of where we want to go. What is needed now is that execution. You know, how do we take those tangible steps to make it happen? And that is where I think we have done, I think, a very good job of building the strategy. We know the targets that we want. We are just lagging in terms of putting that first step out there and making it happen and demonstrating the value further.
Okay, thank you. So right there, we jump into more implementation. I am beautiful, and I'll probably be more beautiful than Dax, but I'm still going to hand back over to him and let him continue a conversation that he knows a lot more about. So off with me, Francis, please.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm sorry, but I don't know what happened. My internet just suddenly flipped out, and I don't know. But anyway,
that's why I'm here.
Good work. Good work.
So thank you for stepping in. So I think it goes along with the theme of unexpected, but obviously you were prepared. I think I think when I left you, we were just sort of talking about some of the sort of the lessons from the pandemic. And Dionne I think was talking about the importance of going and supplying electricity through that we're working from home. There's a question which we have which has come up from Rita about the future of the what will the future look like in the energy sector. I think that might be quite a nice question for us to sort of take and to pivot then, I think, to the Caribbean, because I think that the energy sector is going to look different in different places, depending on what resources are available, on what is driving decision making. So I think that it's difficult to say that there is going to be one global energy sector which is going to look the same everywhere. I think that most of the models show at a global level, there's more of a mix. So you sort of went through if you go historically, the world went from basically biomass and wood, coal, and then oil, natural gas playing increasingly important role. And I think that now with renewables coming on, everyone is saying, well, it's going to be there's not going to be one dominant fuel type, as there may have been in past centuries. That's sort of what I think at a global level. But then in each country, it's going to look very different. So, in somewhere like Trinidad and Tobago, where we have natural gas in particular, that is going to go on playing a major part, of our industry. And another country where they may not have fossil fuels, may not have natural gas, renewables are probably going to play an increasingly important part, but also it depends on the renewables as well. There's different renewables provide different things. So I don't know, Steve, if you perhaps you want to take that and sort of build on what's the Caribbean energy future going to look like?
Right. Yes. Okay. Yes. Although you say, and I agree with you, that different countries will, have different outcomes. I think there are clear themes, though. One is because virtually every country in the world is talking about a strategy to reduce the use of fossil fuels, and as I mentioned, we will, like in Total Energies and everywhere else, our plan focus. Well, we break fossil fuels into the traditional petroleum, liquid petroleum, which is the gasoline, diesel, heavy fuel oils, and natural gas. So one of the big shifts that we are working on ourselves is to liquid petroleum content, and in countries around the world that use coal, I think everybody accepts that there's a big push to reduce the use of coal. So coal and liquid petroleum, which are seen as the most polluting of the fuels, we will be working. And I did mention that, currently liquid petroleum, I think, is over half, or in 2020, it was over half of our revenues. We are oil and gas companies, but our 2030 target is that it will be significantly less than half. I think, in fact, less than 30% of our revenues by 2030, we are projecting will come from liquid petroleum. So the big shift for us will be increased natural gas and renewables. And I think, that's one company, but I think we will see a similar move all over the world, that, we are going to reduce the most polluting things. And so natural gas and renewables are going to feature a lot larger in the energy sector all over the world, in the coming years. Oh, are you there, Dax?
And the sector where, are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Yeah, a little better now, yes.
Hearing me? Yeah, let me try to switch to the okay. Let me just ask, I mean, the sector, and Dionne, I know it's something that you're working on in Jamaica. The sector which uses a lot of the liquid fuels, gasoline and diesel, is the transport sector. That's the traditional sector, and we're seeing this move very strongly around the world to the electrification of transport, and electric vehicles playing an increasingly important role. We're seeing it particularly. It's been driven by the global climate concerns, but has also been driven by local environmental concerns, particularly in Asia, in China, and in India, where there's a lot of concern about air quality within cities. Where is that in the Caribbean? I mean, the move towards electric vehicles, and why are we not seeing it moving faster?
So as a part of our energy transition mandate, certainly electrification is a big opportunity for us. As we look to our indigenous resources, we think that we need to be matching that sort of production of energy, with directing that energy into transportation. And we think that certainly will be a great opportunity for us to make an impact in terms of our climate change targets. So for us in Jamaica, we are definitely moving very quickly in that area. We recently just started an aggressive program as a utility for, just to put in the charging infrastructure, which is a very strong signal to the market that, hey, if you get those electric vehicles here, we'll be ready to support you as you travel around the island doing, your weekend runs and so on. And we have additional players in the market who are really getting, involved in new types of business models to support the electric or e-mobility sector. So I think, the experience in Jamaica, and I think that, a couple of Caribbean islands are a bit ahead, started ahead of us. The momentum is definitely picking up across the region based on the conversations that I have been having. And we have really been exchanging notes as well in terms of the lessons learned and how we can also develop the sector. So what we do see happening in Jamaica is that, the government certainly has lined up in terms of policy. I think that's the same thing in other jurisdictions. The government policies are critical signal as well. You need to match not only the infrastructure, but the vehicles coming in. And I think that, the government regimes in terms of tax reductions on the vehicles have really been very useful in doing that. Similarly, in Jamaica, those announcements have really created a lot of interest. When you are in these chat groups, you hear the kind of impact that it is having in the sector, and we're beginning to see those vehicles flow into Jamaica. So as we look ahead, one of the things that I know is very important is that e-mobility sits in an ecosystem It's a totally new area. And we have been working with our multilateral partners, for example, the IDB, really to ensure you have the mechanics, you have the banks, you have the insurers, you have an ecosystem to ensure that anybody who buys that vehicle, just as if you had an internal combustion engine, you're able to ensure that you can access those services and functionalities out there. So we're trying to wrap that together. It's my view that if we can begin to demonstrate that electric vehicle experience, which is very new to a lot of our population, we are going to see a step change in the demand for those kinds of transport options. And we anticipate that probably will occur within, by about year 5, if we get it right in terms of just the development of the sector. But we need the government on board, and we need the entrepreneurship active in the space to support that, in your homes, in your condos, in your business places across the island. We need to see that happen. But we think that we are seeing very strong signs of growth in the sector right now.
Yeah, I think it's an important factor for I think businesses who are in that sort of automotive sector to think about as well, because I have an electric car, and almost 3 years now, and it's amazing how less service less money you spend on servicing an electric car compared to an internal combustion engine. I mean, it really is just chalk and cheese. I mean, and so there's a lot of small businesses who have built a business on servicing automobiles, internal combustion engines. That is a business which I think is very open for disruption, because there's a lot less after sales servicing on an electric car. I mean, it's a once a year servicing, and so far the only thing I've had any changes on is my air conditioning system. Other than that, there's not, and I've spent hugely less money on servicing. So that's something which I think that people in that sector, that's a disruptor which is coming along. The big car companies are looking at that, because it does change the model. And it's an interesting one. But the Caribbean, I think, is absolutely ideally suited for electric cars, because most of the time you're traveling very small distances. I mean, Jamaica's a bit bigger than most of the islands in the Eastern Caribbean. So I think it's an interesting, it's going to be an interesting space. And I think the challenge at the moment is that the car dealers can't get the cars that they need to be able to sell. There was I don't know, Stephen, if you had any sort of thoughts around the electric cars side of the equation.
Well, just to agree that electrification generally, I think cars will be the big the area where we see it well, but a lot of the places where we actually go to and buy like diesel oil to use in some piece of equipment or something, I think over time all of those are going to disappear as the world pushes for electrification, and it comes back down to the principle that it is better for the environment if you can use electricity, and electricity particularly produced from renewable energy. You are making a big difference in the world. So whether it's our lawnmowers, which we full of, I think even those will be moving to electricity, and all as I say, a lot of the equipment where we would buy a little bit of diesel to fire up that equipment, a lot of it is going to shift to electric. So as you pointed out, Dax, that a lot of the businesses and industries that we know pursue, which are related to maintaining these equipments, will have to change. On a bigger scale, I often make the point that the luxury car makers, the Mercedes and the BMWs and so on, a lot of their expertise is actually how can you get maximum power out of an internal combustion engine. But all of that is about to disappear. That was the basis of their wealth over the years, and that is about to totally disappear, because now, most people, have that ability to develop electric vehicles that can go very fast and perform very well. And so you see how, so even at that level, that big international level, electrification is having a big impact.
There's a whole question also about other transport with marine fuels, but I think that's probably beyond the scope of this conversation. I had the note there saying, so we had two notes there that I'm looking at. One is about people management, so perhaps we could get to that. And then there was a fintech question. I'm not quite sure what that I'm not seeing that showing up on my panel.
I wonder if that was a holdover from the last panel.
I think we have we could jump into that.
Let's ask the people management question. Yeah. So Dionne, on the people management side.
Right, and I tell you,
how do you incorporate talent management into your long-term strategy?
In the energy sector, I tell you, talent management has become a major focus. Normally in the sector, you think of old engineers, and just kind of working for years. But the profile of the person working in the energy sector has significantly changed. I just want to add, that certainly a lot more women, for the women are operating in these technical areas, and we're seeing them in operating in very interesting areas of the business. We are seeing, the need to merge a lot of skill sets, the engineering, the communications, the marketing, the new form of service that we intend to deliver to the customer has required that we have a lot more, I would say, skill sets than, the traditional form. And so we have been on that drive, even as JPS, to begin to bring in that kind of talent within the business. We think that the refreshing of our team members, bringing in the new ideas, bringing in the new directions, has really done a lot for us over the past couple of years. And the focus really is that over the next cycle, in terms of working with our strategic plan, the intention really is to continue to bring more innovation in the space. We have an innovation lab that we have used as a transition space to bring in the talent. We have been working with the organizations externally, the skills-based enterprises, to identify the talent, give them the opportunity also to interact with us. And we have, recently, we have actually done some entrepreneurship bootcamp. So even if the talent is not within our business, we are also enabling the talent to thrive outside, because we believe that, businesses and enterprises, strong business, strong enterprises also works for the entire energy sector. So that is built into our strategic program. And I'm looking at, I met a very fantastic young lady, yesterday, just talking about her experience and in EV and, in the new types of energy technologies out there, and totally excited to bring that to our conversations today. And, it really is an example of how we are using our opportunity, our position, to expose them so they get a new perspective and can add even greater value to what they already know.
An interesting anecdote, we had our Trinidad Tobago Energy Conference just a few weeks ago. And one of the things we put together was what we call the next generation of leaders. So we went out to all of the major companies and asked them to give us, who is your next generation set of leaders? Who in the next decade are the people who are going to be coming forward and leading your company? We didn't mention anything about gender, but then the group, so we had 6 people came forward. 5 of the 6 were female. So that's an interesting change. And I think that 5 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. No. So that is a big shift. And yes, I think we have seen some companies. So I mean, the one that really comes to mind was BHP. Now just merged their petroleum division with Woodside. But BHP set themselves a very clear objective that they had to be 50-50, that the gender balance of their organization had to represent the gender balance of the population, because otherwise you're leaving a lot of talented people who you're not bringing into the system. Anyway, so Stephen, any thoughts about people management and within planning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, obviously, I agree with everything that Dionne said. But also, I just want to, again, as we went back perhaps where we started, our energy companies generally provide a service that is essential, and I think, they have done a good job at that. But but providing that essential service, you can't do it without people. Having the electricity available, going 24/7, having fuel when you want it. It takes people if we fail in developing people, we will fail in providing the service, and that's when things will start to go awry. The other big thing is that energy companies, we tend to deal in a product that can kill, so safety is a big imperative of everything that we do. And I think having that safety focus, again, you can't develop a safety focus in your company unless you really have people involved. It's not something you can develop a system and say, that is it. The people have to be involved. So I think with that, energy companies have always, I think, maybe been a bit at the forefront of some of the trends in HR, in terms of bringing new trends. As Dionne mentioned, there was a time when the image was of just a bunch of old engineers, male engineers, but that has changed rapidly. And I think so. It's not just JPS, but it's across, I think, most of the industry that you're seeing these changes, that people have to be developed. And, well, for us, we sometimes provide a physical product in terms of the fuel. JPS's product is more intangible, but you really, I think we recognize we cannot provide that product without the people, and and the people have to be empowered. So, and especially as we change, we have to be reskilling here at Total Energies. People who made their living selling petroleum now have to be, thinking of selling renewable energy systems as well. So, we are facilitating, people to make such changes.
So Danielle, I noticed, so we're sort of at the end of the time we had set aside for the session. There were other things I wanted to discuss, but I guess, do you need us now to wrap up?
Yes, I think we are going to wrap up now because we want to stay on time for our amazing networking session that's happening later this evening, and also welcoming Dr. Reynolds in a short while. So I really want to thank Stephen and Dionne for joining us, and of course Dax for being an awesome moderator to just bringing a whole new perspective on the strategic planning, delivering strategy in your sector, and being able to move this into other industries. What we heard today was that recognizing, energy, as Stephen said earlier, this is a long term. We're not talking about a 3 to 5 year strategy that many of us are working on. Energy is long term. We're talking 30 years, 20 years, and that level, very high level of investment. So recognizing long term drivers and demands for all stakeholders, and I think the all stakeholders was what was so important there. I really enjoyed where we talked about being a part of developing the whole industry, the whole sector. There was a lot of conversation around collaboration, which we also saw in the financial panel that we had earlier. I like where we talked about not just creating strategies, but creating implementable strategies. Dionne, I think that was you saying, we can plan till we can plan and plan and plan. But are we creating strategies that are actually implementable? Constant exploration, looking at global opportunities for our industry, creating a diversification strategy and being committed to delivering on them. Things are going to come out of left wing. Something in life is going to slide tackle you, for anybody who knows football, or take you way down the wicket that you had not planned. For my cricket fanatics, so things are going to happen, but we want to stay on course of our strategy, but while still remaining agile, of course. We talked about creating strong collaborations with governments and regulators and getting alignment. So when we're ready to do something big, roll out something new, everyone is fully aligned. And then, you know, in closing that, you know, really learning how to balance profits, sustainable business, environmental impact, health and safety, and of course, developing people at the same time. This was the robust conversation that we have just had for the past hour. We are thankful to Stephen, Dionne, and of course, Dax. Thank you for joining us. Any last words?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you.
And just thank you for organizing the session. It's really nice. I mean, I really enjoyed this opportunity to talk to, you know, to colleagues in Jamaica who I know, but we don't, you know, always talk, and it was just great to be able to link up. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much again for joining us. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take a 10-minute break. You'll be moved into the lounge, but when you come back, we'll bring you right back. Grab a snack, move around. We have so much ahead. Totally excited to continue this day with you. We'll be back in actually exactly 10 minutes. See you at 3:58.